It was 1943. The Pacific skies were restless, bright blue in the morning, bruised with smoke by evening. Down below, the islands looked peaceful from a distance, but the men stationed there knew better. They knew how quiet the world could get before the sound of engines tore it open again. The Japanese ruled those skies then. They flew light, fast, and fearless, men who believed they owned the air. For years they had been untouchable. Their Zeros danced and turned with grace, while others struggled to keep up. Every battle seemed to prove it. The Japanese aces were sharper, their planes more agile, their confidence unshakable. Across the ocean, young American pilots were learning fast, but often learning the hard way. Many were boys not long out of high school, suddenly wearing wings and helmets, staring down the endless Pacific. They flew what they were given, and they made do. Some came home. Many didn't. But in those same months, something new began to stir, a shape unlike anything seen before. Long, narrow wings, 2 engines instead of 1, and a tail split in 2 like a fork cutting through the wind. It didn't look right, not at first. Even the ground crews tilted their heads when they saw it roll out for the first time. It was the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. At first, folks didn't know what to make of it. Too heavy, some said, too strange. It didn't fit the mold of the quick, nimble fighter everyone thought a dogfight demanded. The Japanese pilots laughed when they saw it glinting in the sun for the first time. They called it awkward, they called it clumsy, and to their eyes, it was just another American experiment doomed to fail. But up in the air, things looked different, and the sky has a way of humbling men. In the early months, the Lightning wasn't perfect. Its pilots were still figuring out how to handle that twin-engine power, how to balance the torque, how to make the turns count. But even then, there was something about it, something that felt solid. It wasn't built for pretty flying. It was built for power. When those engines started together, they didn't sound like anything else. A deep, steady rumble, not the quick snarl of a single-engine fighter, but a low, confident growl. Pilots said it felt like sitting on top of a living thing, and when they pushed the throttle forward, you could feel it in your chest. The Lightning didn't dance in the air. It hunted. The first few missions were cautious, patrolled flights, escort runs, the kind of sorties that teach you what your machine can really do. Pilots came back with wide eyes, some shaken, some grinning. They'd talk about the speed, how the Lightning climbed like nothing else. They'd talk about the way the news dipped just before firing, and the 8.5 caliber guns roared as one. And they'd talk about that feeling when the twin tails sliced through a cloud bank and the world disappeared into white. It didn't take long before stories started spreading, some true, some exaggerated, but that's how legends begin. Somewhere over the Solomons, a Japanese patrol spotted a strange twin-tailed silhouette in the morning light. They dove in, confident as ever. The fight didn't last long. The Lightning didn't twist and turn like their Zeros. It didn't have to. It dove hard, leveled out, and came straight through the fight. And when its guns spoke, they spoke with thunder. One of the Zeros went down in flames. The rest broke away, confused. After that, the laughter started to fade. The men in the Pacific began to talk differently about that plane. They called it a beast, a monster, a twin-tailed devil. And that name, the fork-tailed devil, began to spread through radio chatter and campfire talk alike. Still, the Lightning wasn't just about speed or firepower. It was about endurance. It could fly farther, higher, longer. In a world where fuel and distance meant life and death, that mattered more than glory. Its pilots could escort bombers deep into enemy territory and still make it home. That was new. That was power. Down on the ground, the air crews treated every P-38 like a living creature. They wiped the wings with rags, polished the nose, listened to the engines like doctors listening to a heartbeat. They knew that if you took care of her, she'd take care of you. At night, after the work was done, they'd sit on ammo crates and stare up at the stars. The island air smelt of fuel and salt. Somewhere far out, the faint hum of engines would drift in from a patrol, and the men would listen, quiet, waiting. When the sound grew louder, you could see a few heads lift, a few shoulders ease. They'd nod to each other. "Lightning's back," someone would say. And there was pride in those words. The Japanese still flew with courage. They still believed in their skill, and rightly so. But even they began to notice that something had changed. The skies weren't theirs alone anymore. The lightning was rewriting the rules of air combat. It didn't matter how sharp a pilot's reflexes were when a P-38 came out of the sun, silent until it wasn't. It didn't matter how many tight turns a Zero could make when the lightning had the range to chase you all the way home. It was a new kind of power, one built not on grace, but on strength. And the pilots flying them, young, pale-faced boys who had never seen war before, began to believe in themselves too. They weren't laughing anymore. War has a way of aging men faster than time ever could. Funny thing about those early days, no one flying back then thought about glory or legends. They just thought about getting through another day, another flight, another sky full of noise. But those who watched it all unfold, the mechanics, the radio men, the locals on the islands, they could feel it. Something was shifting. The laughter had turned to caution. And in the months that followed, that caution turned to fear. The P-38 was proving itself not just as a fighter, but as a message. The skies of the Pacific were no longer owned by anyone. They belonged to whoever could reach higher, fly farther, and endure longer. And the lightning, with its twin hearts of fire, could do all three.
The name spread quietly at first. Some said a Japanese pilot had whispered it over the radio. Others claimed it began as a joke that stopped being funny. Either way, by the summer of 1943, the words "fork-tailed devil" carried across the Pacific like wind. No one quite knew who said it first, but everyone understood why. That strange twin-tailed fighter had teeth, and it was beginning to show them. The pilots who flew the Lightning learned as they went. There were no manuals for fighting in two engines. You had to feel it. The trick was balance, keeping both hearts beating in rhythm while the world tried to shake you apart. They talked about it like taming a wild horse. Push too hard and she'd bite. Handle her right and she'd carry you through anything. Somewhere over New Guinea, a flight lieutenant named McAllister took off before dawn. The air was heavy, the kind that stuck to your skin. His crew watched the twin props flash silver in the half-light. He banked north, climbing into the pale sky. He'd only been flying the P-38 for 3 weeks. That morning, he didn't say much. Most pilots didn't. Before takeoff, there was a quiet that felt almost sacred, a silence filled with the smell of oil and the distant crash of the sea. Up high, the world looked peaceful. Clouds drifted like slow ships, hiding the jungle below. But the radios told a different story. Enemy patrol spotted, altitude 22,000, heading east. McAllister felt the engines hum through the yoke. He pushed forward, nose down, sunlight flashing across the canopy. They met over a chain of islands no one would remember by name. The Zeros came in fast, confident, They always were. They'd spent years ruling this sky, their sky. But the lightning wasn't playing by old rules. McAllister kept level, steady. He didn't chase the turns. He waited. When a Zero slid across his path, he squeezed the trigger once. 8.5 caliber guns spoke together. The sky lit up for half a second, and then the Japanese fighter folded into smoke. He didn't cheer. He just kept flying. That was how it was out there. No celebrations, just breath, sweat, and the long flight home. Word of that fight drifted back to the base by evening. The crew listened, quiet, some nodding, some staring at the ground. Every pilot knew it could have been any one of them. Each story carried the same mixture of relief and guilt. Funny thing about war, you never really feel like you've won. You just feel like you've survived one more day. As the months rolled on, the lightning proved itself again and again. It wasn't graceful, but it was relentless. It could climb faster, dive steeper, fly longer. Its pilots began to trust it with their lives, and many owed their lives to it. On the ground, engineers learned its moods. Tighten a bolt wrong, and she'd rattle. Treat her rough, and she'd spit back fire. But treat her with patience, she'd purr like a tiger half asleep. The P-38 changed the rhythm of the air war. Escort missions that once felt hopeless now had a guardian. Bombers flying deep over enemy territory could finally see silver wings beside them all the way home. That mattered. It saved lives. Japanese pilots noticed the shift too. They began to respect the lightning, even as they feared it. Reports filtered back to command about this new fighter that didn't fall easily, didn't back off. It was heavier, yes, but it didn't quit. In dogfights, Zeros could still twist tighter, but the lightning held the high ground. It could dive out of reach, then rise again before the enemy even leveled out. The twin engines gave it the strength to survive hits that would have ended any single-engine plane. By autumn, the sky itself felt different. Those who'd been there from the start could sense it, the air heavier with anticipation, less laughter in the mess tents. The jokes about clumsy twin tails disappeared. Respect had taken their place. At night, pilots wrote letters home under lantern light. They didn't talk about kills or victories. They talked about weather, about the sound of waves, about the strange comfort of hearing both engines start on the first try. Little things kept a man human. One letter survived from a pilot named Davis. The lightning feels like home now. I used to think she was too big for the sky. Turns out the sky was just too small for her. No one knows if Davis made it back, but his words lived on in the stories others told. The fork-tailed devil wasn't just a machine. It became a presence, a reminder that courage could be built from metal and willpower alike. Every pilot who climbed into one carried that quiet pride. Somewhere over the South Pacific, two opposing pilots, one American, one Japanese, found themselves alone after the rest of their squadron scattered. Both low on fuel, both flying wounded machines. They circled each other in the dying light, engines coughing, wings trembling. Neither fired. They just stared across the space between them. When the American dipped his wing in salute, the Japanese pilot nodded once, turned, and limped toward the horizon. War had taken much from both, but in that moment it gave back a small piece of honor. Truth is, men who lived through those skies never forgot the faces they never met. Enemies in uniform, yes, but brothers in fear, in courage, and in the silence that followed the guns. By winter of 1943, the P-38 had earned its place. The laughter was gone. The sky belonged to no one now, only to those who respected it. And deep down, even the Japanese aces knew the twin-tailed machine they once mocked had changed the story of the war. It had changed their story, too. April 1943. The war in the Pacific had changed shape. Each island, each strip of jungle had turned into a desperate heartbeat. And somewhere inside that heartbeat, a message appeared. Short, coded, but heavy with promise. It said one thing that made every pilot stop breathing for a second. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, flight confirmed. The architect of Pearl Harbor, the man whose name still echoed in American homes, whose plans had written the first painful chapter of the war. The Lightning pilots didn't know the politics. They didn't care much for headlines. All they knew was this: the man responsible for so many lost friends was going to be in the air, and they had a chance to meet him there. The mission was secret. No one outside that room knew what was about to unfold. Even those who did were careful not to say too much. Maps were rolled out, distances measured, fuel, altitude, wind direction, all balanced on a knife's edge. The order was simple, but impossible. Fly nearly 500 miles over open sea. Arrive at the exact minute. Find a small formation of Japanese bombers and strike down the most guarded man in the Pacific. They called it Operation Vengeance, a name that sounded too heavy for the quiet men who would fly it. Before dawn, the pilots gathered beside their P-38 Lightnings. No speeches, no banners, no music. Just a few words between men who understood what this flight meant. Someone muttered, "Let's bring our boys a little peace today." Another nodded, pulling on his gloves. Engines roared to life, twin growls cutting through the mist. 4 lightnings rose into the dim sky, engines pounding like steady hearts. The ocean below stretched endless and silent. They flew low, dangerously low, skimming just above the waves to stay hidden from radar. Every gust of wind felt like a shove. Every second felt like a lifetime. The sun climbed higher. Sweat gathered inside flight suits. The horizon shimmered like glass. No one spoke. Each pilot was alone inside his own thoughts, tracing the ghosts of friends lost in earlier fights. 2 hours passed, then 3. Fuel was running thin, still nothing, just the endless blue and the hum of engines. And then, through the haze, dark specks appeared in the distance. 12, maybe 13 planes moving in tight formation. Japanese bombers guarded by Zeros. And in the center, one special plane, a Mitsubishi G4M Betty, carrying Admiral Yamamoto himself. The Americans banked slightly, spreading wide like wolves closing in on prey. No words over the radio, just short clicks of acknowledgement. The first lightning dove from the sun. The Japanese formation broke instantly, chaos spilling across the sky. Engines screamed, tracers lit the morning air like fireworks that meant business. Major Tom Lanphier lined up his shot. He squeezed the trigger. The .50 calibers answered, a thunderous, rolling roar. One of the escorting Zeros burst apart mid-turn. The rest dove hard, trying to pull the Americans away from the bombers. But it was too late. The P-38s had found their mark. Another lightning, flown by Rex Barber, swept in low. He fired a short burst. Flames blossomed from the right engine of Yamamoto's plane. Smoke trailed behind it like a black ribbon. Witnesses later said the bomber rolled once, then dipped nose first into the jungle canopy of Bougainville Island. There was no explosion, just a hollow thud in the distance, like the sound of a door closing on an era. The dogfight lasted barely minutes, but those minutes felt eternal. When the lightnings finally turned for home, they flew silent again. No cheers, no victory calls, just the long hum of engines over water and the weight of what they'd done. Lanfear wrote later, "I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel angry. I just felt the world grow quiet." Back at the base, the mission was logged under simple words, "Objective achieved." But among the crew, there was no celebration. They knew the truth. Vengeance never feels clean. It just makes the air a little heavier. News of Yamamoto's death reached the Japanese command days later. It struck like lightning, not just for the loss of a leader, but for what it meant. Their skies were no longer untouchable. The fork-tailed devil had found its way into even the most guarded corners of their war. In the years that followed, stories of that mission turned into legend. Some versions called it justice, others called it tragedy, but those who flew that day rarely spoke of it again. They'd done what they were asked to do, nothing more, nothing less. That's how it was in those days. Men carried the weight of duty without asking for glory. They flew into storms and never looked back. One mechanic years later said, "You could tell which pilots flew that mission. They came back older, not in years, but in eyes." The P-38 had proven something that day, not just its range or its speed or its power. It had proven the reach of courage and how far a man could fly when guided by quiet resolve. The sky changed after Bougainville. It felt emptier somehow, as if even the clouds knew what had happened below them. And though the war raged on, there was a shift. The fork-tailed devil was no longer a curiosity or a target of laughter. It had become a symbol of precision, patience, and the long hand of fate. By the time the Lightnings returned home, their tanks were nearly dry. The last few miles were flown on prayer and stubbornness. When they landed, the crews ran forward, not with cheers, but with relief. Every man there knew they had witnessed something that would echo through time.
After Bougainville, everything changed. The Pacific wasn't the same sky anymore. You could feel it in the way the airmen talked, in the way they looked at the horizon before takeoff. There was something different now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. The Japanese, once proud masters of the air, began to watch their skies differently, too. They had ruled the early war, flying Zero fighters that seemed untouchable. Light, agile, elegant, they danced through the air like swallows, and for a long time those swallows ruled the sun. But the Lightning, it wasn't made for dancing. It was made for hunting. 2 engines, long wings, hard lines. It wasn't graceful, but it didn't need to be. It was relentless. When a P-38 locked on, it didn't chase with fancy turns or acrobatics. It just kept coming, steady and sure, like a storm you couldn't outfly. At first,
Japanese pilots mocked it. They called it clumsy. They said it looked like two planes welded together. They laughed at the shape, at the size, at the way it seemed too heavy to fight. But the laughter faded. One by one, stories began to spread across their bases, quiet, uneasy stories. A Zero would dive on a P-38 expecting an easy kill, and the next thing anyone saw was smoke and the devil still flying. Another pilot would vanish over the sea, no radio, no trace, just a shimmer on the water where his plane had gone down. They started calling it something else then. Nio-tsuno Akuma, the two-tailed devil. And this time, it wasn't a joke. The P-38's long reach changed the war. It could fly farther than anything the Japanese had. It could climb higher, stay up longer, hit harder. And the men who flew it learned how to use every bit of that advantage. By 1944, the Pacific skies were turning. Island by island, mile by mile, the balance shifted. The Japanese were still fierce, still brave, but they were fighting a machine that seemed born for that vast ocean air. In the Solomons, the Marshalls, the Marianas, the fork-tailed devil appeared everywhere. It escorted bombers, it strafed airfields, it hunted enemy convoys across miles of empty water. There was one pilot, a quiet fellow from Minnesota named Dick Bong. He wasn't loud or brash, just calm, focused. He flew the Lightning like it was an extension of his heartbeat, and before long he became the highest-scoring American ace of the war. 40 victories, all in the P-38. But Bong never bragged. He said once, "The plane did most of the work. I just tried to keep up." There was another, Tommy McGuire, fierce, daring, sharp as a blade. He and Bong pushed the Lightning to its limits day after day. They weren't heroes to themselves. They were just men doing a hard job in a harder sky. Meanwhile, the Japanese aces who had once ruled the air found themselves flying shorter missions from smaller airstrips with less fuel and fewer planes. They fought with courage, but the sky was no longer theirs. Every time they saw that twin tail glinting in the sunlight, they knew the fight had changed. Still, respect grew, quietly, almost reluctantly. When captured Japanese pilots were questioned after the war, many of them spoke of the Lightning. They said it was the one plane they feared most. It could take punishment, it could strike without warning, and it could bring its pilot home when every other machine would have fallen apart. Even among Americans there was awe. Mechanics, crewmen, young replacements fresh from the States, they all stopped to watch when a P-38 took off. That deep twin-engined hum carried across the runway like music. And when it climbed, it didn't just rise, it owned the air. One airman said, "When those twin tails lifted, you knew the fight was going to be ours." But victory never came easy. The war dragged on, bitter and costly. Men grew older in months. Each mission took something from them, a friend, a bit of courage, a piece of peace they might never get back. Sometimes, after a long flight, they'd sit by their planes at dusk, helmets off, staring at the horizon. The Pacific sky could be cruel, but it could also be beautiful. Streaks of orange and violet melting into the horizon. No words were needed. The engines ticking as they cooled said enough. They didn't laugh much anymore. Not at the enemy, not at anything. Because by then, every pilot understood what it meant to survive up there. Funny thing, war teaches respect, even between enemies. Not the kind you speak aloud, but the kind you feel deep down. The kind that comes when you realize the man trying to kill you is also doing his best not to die. In those final years of the war, the Lightning became more than a machine. It was a companion, a protector, sometimes even a coffin, but always dependable. Its engines sang across the Pacific until the end, carrying its pilots through storms, gunfire, and silence. And when the Japanese finally stopped laughing, they did it not out of fear, but out of understanding. They had met a rival worthy of their skies. When peace came and the planes were parked for good, the P-38 stood quietly on the airfields, sunlight glinting off its wings. No banners, no parades, no cheers. Just the sound of wind moving through its propellers like the breath of something that had earned its rest. Many of the men who flew it never saw it again. They went home, built lives, raised families. But in quiet moments, when they heard a twin-engine hum in the distance, their hearts still lifted. Old instincts, old memories. They'd smile, sometimes without meaning to, and say softly, "That's a Lightning." And those who never came home, the ones still out there under endless water or deep in island jungles, the sky still remembers them. Every sunrise over the Pacific carries a trace of silver in it, like the gleam of a twin tail cutting through the clouds.
The war ended, but the sound of it never really did. Even years later, when the guns were gone and the islands were quiet, men could still hear echoes in their sleep. The deep hum of engines, the rattle of guns, the whistle of wind through open cockpits. Time has a way of softening everything, even the hardest memories. But some days, when the morning light hits just right, those old moments come back clear as ever. The Pacific, they say, has a long memory. Its skies keep secrets. Its winds still carry whispers of the men who once fought above it. And if you stand on certain beaches, when the tide is low and the air is still, you might just hear it, a faint, distant growl, like the ghost of a twin-engine Lightning cutting through time. For the men who lived through it, the memories are scattered like shells along the shore. Some shine bright, others are buried deep. But every one tells a piece of what happened when the world was at its breaking point. They remember the faces first, young men, tired men, scared men, boys who learned to shave one week and to fly the next. They remember the smell of oil and salt, the feel of canvas flight suits stiff with sweat. They remember laughter, too, small bursts of it between missions, because laughter was the only way to keep from falling apart. And they remember the planes, always the planes. The P-38 Lightning, the forked-tailed devil, was more than just metal and fuel. It was a companion, a teacher, a survivor. It carried men further than they thought they could go, and it brought many of them home when nothing else would have. When peace came, most of those planes were scrapped, melted down, turned into pots and pans, into pieces of a quieter world. But a few survived, in museums, in hangars, sometimes in fields half forgotten by time.
And when one of them takes to the air today, the sound makes old veterans stop and look up. They stand there for a long while, hats in hand, eyes fixed on the sky. Not because they miss the war, no one misses war, but because that sound carries them back to a time when the world was young and dangerous, and every flight could have been the last. You can see it in their faces, that mix of pride and sorrow. Pride for what they did, sorrow for who didn't come back. They don't talk much about fear. They talk about luck, about weather, about the way the sun hit the wings just before a dive. But behind every easy word is the memory of what it cost to keep the sky. Some still write letters to old squadron friends. Some visit the graves. Some just sit on porches and watch the clouds roll by, wondering what became of the young men they used to be. And sometimes when a grandchild asks about the war, they smile and say, "It was a long time ago. We just did what we had to do." They leave out the part about shaking hands that never stopped trembling, or the dreams that still wake them now and then, because that's how they were raised. Quiet strength, no complaints. Funny thing about memories, they don't fade, they just get quieter, like the sound of an engine idling in the distance. The Japanese aces, too, grew old. Some became teachers, engineers, farmers. And when they spoke of their war, they also spoke with respect. They remembered the courage of the men they once fought against, the strange beauty of those duels high above the clouds. One of them was quoted years later saying, "We feared the lightning, but we also admired it. It was flown by men who fought with honor." That's the thing about the sky. It humbles everyone. It doesn't care about flags or borders. It remembers only the courage of those who flew in it. And so the story of the P-38 Lightning became more than a tale of machines. It became a story of men, of laughter that turned to silence, of rivalry that became respect, of loss that became memory. Today, when historians talk about that war, they mention tactics, engines, weapon calibers. But those who were there, or those who listened closely to them, know it was never just about hardware. It was about heart. Because courage doesn't come from metal. It comes from the quiet decision to take off when you don't know if you'll come back. From the handshake before takeoff. From the whisper that says, "Keep her steady, just a little longer." Somewhere out there, pieces of those old planes still lie beneath the waves, rusted, broken, silent. Fish swim through what used to be cockpits. Coral grows over aluminum wings. Nature has taken them back. But the stories, they float. They move from generation to generation, like the wind. Each time they're told, they remind us what ordinary people can do when the world demands the impossible. You know, funny how time changes things. Back then, it was all noise and fire and fear. Now, it's just the sound of waves and the rustle of trees. But somewhere inside that calm, the sky still keeps its promises. And if you close your eyes, you can almost see it, the shimmer of sun on twin tails, the steady hum of engines climbing through endless blue. A handful of men halfway between heaven and earth, chasing destiny across the horizon. They were young, they were brave, and they carried with them the hopes of a nation that refused to give up. The P-38 Lightning wasn't perfect, but it was there when it mattered. And when the world remembers that war, the sound of its engines still leads the way. Maybe that's why, even now, old pilots look up when a plane passes overhead. Because the sky remembers. It always does. The laughter that once mocked the lightning is gone now.
The men who laughed and the men who proved them wrong all rest under the same sky. But the air they once fought in still carries their stories on every breeze, in every sunrise, in every echo of a distant propeller. So when you hear that sound, that deep, steady growl of twin engines, take a moment. Listen. Somewhere in that hum is everything they were, everything they gave, and everything they became. The forked-tailed devil, they called it, a strange name for something that carried so much grace. But maybe the name fits, because devils or angels, heroes or enemies, they were all men chasing the same sky. And the sky, well, the sky never forgets.